Chapter 5, we're going to finish off the outside of our wall. Okay, we've got windows and doors to put in, lots of flashings and framing bits and pieces. First of all, we need to load all of this stuff up. So over to our components and click on the details button and then open or create a local collection. Then in the Chapter 5 folder, let's open up the Chapter 5 components. So select that folder and then that's going to load everything into this. So scroll down to the bottom and we've got window unit and window frame. We'll also be looking at window board packer as well. So let's go for the window frame first. Click on that and we'll bring that in. And we'll just kind of drop it at that point. And then we're going to line up at this point here. So this outside edge, we're going to try and get to that sort of bottom position of this membrane. Okay, they'll allow a little bit of tolerance. It's a little bit tricky to get in. So I'm going to drop it down and then lift it up. There you go. So coming at it from underneath is probably a little bit easier. So that lines through that corner. We've got a little bit of tolerance there. Probably end up with a little bit more in reality. What then happens is that these support this opening as well, so that the window unit itself is going to sit into this. And probably some of them will be fixed, some of them will be openable, depending on sort of regulations for ventilation, etc. And also conversations between the client, the architects, the designer, the window manufacturer, to find out the best solution to this one. Okay, I'm going to grab this window unit, which I have made based loosely on some manufacturer's sort of information. This is an aluminium clad sort of timber framed window. So you get the benefit of the aluminium for the durability and also the thermal properties of the timber frame. So quite nice. And what we need to kind of do is grab this top corner and pop it into that sort of position. And then it's about 15, 16 mil, or it's about 5/8 of an inch from this front edge. Again, it's, not massively important. So this whole distance is 71. So if I just bring it forward to that point there, it kind of sits inside this bit, and then back about 16 mil, that's 5/8 if you're using Imperial. And then if we've done that, obviously it needs to move up to the top. So we just grab it and bring it up on the Z axis or the blue axis to the top. And that is our first one in. It sits slightly higher. We've got a window sill to come in eventually on the outside, plus some perimeter trim. So we've got a point that we can use, which is the same on each one. So if I click on this point, I can make a copy. So with the move tool, tap the control key, we'll come in and click on that external point there, green axis, and just track along to this point, and that should then give us the same relative position compared to the frame. So there we go. That's the sort of subframe supporting this opening, the two window units in, and then we'll just click up a bit to the window board packer, and these come in and sit in this little recess here. Okay, these are just usually lumps of wood that you'll find just ready to allow you then to put the window board on. Okay, and also there'd be a lot of gunk squeezed into these gaps as well. You want as best to seal as you possibly can. Copy this to the other side. So again, I'll use a position up here somewhere, just on this edge. Click on that, and again, I'm just going to use the green axis to track along, and then find the same relative position, and that's going to drop the other one in. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's not exactly perfect. This is all going to be covered up. Most things in building cover something else up, so ultimately you'll end up with a trim or something nice. The details considered on this are shadow gaps a lot of the time, so a little bit more care has to be taken when we're putting all this stuff together, as opposed to just plonking a piece of timber over these gaps, hiding them all, and potentially having drafts or not very well detailed trim. Okay, so that's our window, that's our frame, and the packers are in. So next up, we'll be looking at positioning the door, and we'll do that in the next video. Chapter 502, we're now installing our external door. That comes into this opening, and it's made up of two parts, which are then made up of other bits and pieces, but I thought it would just be a little bit easier and quicker to just get the door in two goes. So we've got the subframe and the threshold. That usually comes as one piece, different extrusions. And then we've got the casement, which is the door leaves, and the sort of casement frame as well, which then fixes into this. So first of all, we're going to find the external door threshold and frame. Okay, this one here. Well, there are others that are making up this thing, like door subframe, door threshold. Leave those behind unless you want to put them in separately. But we are finding the external door threshold, this thing here. And I'll bring that in. This comes in as one piece. And then to position it, if we roll into this bit and find that external corner, the grey one, and then come into our membrane and just sort of attach it to there. Now we're going to sort of pick it up at this point. This might be temporary because I can't remember how thick this needs to be. So it's better if we kind of position it now and then maybe move it back a bit later. So we'll pick that corner, come on the red axis, and just lock out and pick this point here, which is the outside of the drywall. Okay, because we've got render finish on the inside as well. So that's that bit. That should be the right height as well. So we've coming in, the threshold sitting there. So it's got a little drip there, some capillary breaks. Again, we'll have some render stucco finish on the outside as well at this lower point. So that's the framing. And now we can pick up the external door unit and we can drop that in down there somewhere. And just make sure that we come along the right distance. So again, just lock it in to that sort of point. So again, pick it up at the edge. And then we are looking at bringing this thing in like so. So you get the picture. It goes in something like that. If we come down to the bottom, this is the weather bar. Okay, so this is going to stop any wind-driven rain from sort of getting through underneath the door. So we'll just bring that to this point. There's going to be a series of brushes and seals and all sorts of other stuff around here as well. So you'll end up with a pretty good good seal on this. The internal floor is going to come up. We've got an extra piece that's going to fit onto this, which is going to fill in this gap, and we'll be putting mesh across this joint and adding a latex self-leveling screed to it. Okay, so that'll happen later on. For now, we might need to adjust this a little bit later, but for now, that's pretty much our door in. So we've now got the door and window. This is as it's set out on the original house. So we've got cladding to go between these two. And then around about this point, we've got the stucco that goes on. And then we've got the cladding that comes down at this point as well. Okay, so all that to come later on in this chapter. Chapter 503, building up the rain screen. So rain screen is a system of either panels, timber, anything really that's going to give the wall an extra level of protection. Okay, you wouldn't just rely on the membrane. It wouldn't look very good either to protect it. So the rain screen is going to act as a sort of first line of defense for the rain. Moisture or water will get through it, but that's the intention. But there's also gaps within it to allow ventilation of the rain screen so that any moisture can dry off fairly quickly as well. Okay, so that's what rain screen is, made up of all sorts of different systems. And we're going to apply a timber, vertical timber panel system to this. So the first up is finding some insulation, because we'll be insulating behind that. And if we come down to L for lower external insulation, and then grab that, just drop it in, and then come around to this point, and then we'll just pop that on there like so. Okay, so that's the insulation. This is not a mineral wool style insulation. This is going to be a closed cell, sort of hard insulation. Could be foil backed as well for extra insulative properties. So next onto this, we're going to put some battens. This insulation itself will be clipped in with special clips that will hold it into place. And then we come down, or go up, in fact, to the 1x3 furring batten. So the furring batten has got a chamfer across the top. Okay, so that's allowing then any moisture, any rainwater to run off and down there. We're probably going to scale this off to the end in a bit. We're going to copy this to the bottom, this one here. So make sure it's on the blue axis, and then we'll just lock it out sort of that point there. Okay, so we've got our timber running all the way across this point and this point. And then we'll copy this one down to the bottom. So grab it from the bottom, and then you can put it to this point. And then as it's hit that, if we go /3, that will probably give us enough in the way of fixing points. So now we've got some scaling to do. We could just make these unique and pull them along, but if I just grab them both and then use the scale tool and find the middle one, which tells me that it's green scale about opposite point, I can then just stretch that out to that point. And then these 3, I can move to this back point, and that should be okay. I know scale then, S on the keyboard for scale. Once again, we'll just push that back to that point there. Okay, so those battens are in, ready to take our cedar panels. So the cedar panels, we'll find those 4-inch cedar cladding strips. So just one whole thing. I didn't bother turning these into individual pieces, but if we pop it in as well, and then we come out a bit, and then we see the tongue and grooving on this. And the important thing with the tongue and groove is that this piece isn't the same length as this here. So you want to drive that in closer to that. Then this is not going to touch that, okay, in case it swells or expands. And the reason I've left gaps instead is simply because when you render this, the gap gives you a nice little sort of finish that you don't necessarily see without a gap in there. So I'm just going to position this corner up to the sort of top of this bit, and then lift this up so it lines up through that. Okay, there will be a trim coming over the top of this, the windowsill coming over the top of that eventually. Let's just make sure that it's working at this point as well. Maybe we bring it across a bit. Again, these things can all be adjusted later, but something like that. Okay, so it's fixed onto that, like so. So that's pretty much the total thickness of the wall. On the outside anyway, we've got a bit more to add on the inside. So you can see it's quite a chunky old thing. It does take a while to build these things up, but once you've got it all sorted out and sealed around the edges, then you've got a very good and very efficient system. 2 bits of insulation, more if you need. If it gets colder, then make the frames thicker or add extra levels of insulation on the inside. You could have drywall with insulation, which is fixed via a dot and dab system. Again, that's all going to increase the U value of this wall. Okay, so that's that bit. We've got next a little bit of stucco to add on top, and then we can start looking at flashings and finishing around the openings. Chapter 504, applying the 3-coat stucco. So that's going to come up here. So we're going to put some insulation on first. That's going to give us a little bit of an increase in depth as well. So we've got 3-inch insulation. Then we'll put some mesh over the top of that. So specifically designed for sort of applying a 3-coat stucco system, or other types of stucco are available as well. So that's going to sit on top of the insulation, and then we're going to apply our 3 coats. So first up, it's the 3-inch external insulation. Everything kind of fixes to this top corner. So I could have made life easier for myself by putting the insert point there, but it doesn't take long to position these things. So the insulation is in first. Then we come down to the S's for stucco. And we're finding this thing first. Now this is a amalgamation of the fixings and the stucco mesh that goes across the top. So we'll just drop this in, and again we'll line this through from this corner. Make life easy for ourselves, should I say. So that's that bit. These little things are the fixings. They go through the installation, probably fix back to the board. I'm not 100% certain on that, worth checking. And then we can put the stucco scratch coat. So this is the first one. So this is again going in at this position. So the scratch coat is the one that goes on first, and then they use a comb to give it a nice sort of wavy line pattern. That's then going to give it a nice sort of textured adhesion to the brown coat, which goes on next. So this is the next one. And that will go into the same sort of insertion point if we can. Doesn't want to go. Nearly. Whoops. So this is building up these layers. And then finally, you've got the top coat. Okay, this is the weathering coat, finish coat. Let's pop that in there, and then let's just line it through with this. Okay, it'll all sort of reveal itself later when we start applying materials to this. They will look slightly thicker than they would necessarily be. The top coat, the finish coat, is usually the thinnest, but gives us the hardest finish. And you could, if you wanted to, render around the return as well, if you wanted to. Okay, in my case, I've got flashings that clip in to this, so it gives us a neater finish and replicates what we've shown the client on the original one, where this whole area is dark bronze. Okay, so that's why I'm doing that, but you could put a little angle bead around there so you can sort of finish up to. This is a wet trade. So this is not a board finish. This is applied with a trowel and then finished with a specialist sort of craftsman's job, that one. And there you go. A few flashings to put in. The flashings are the things that sort of help identify the difference between the materials and make sure that we've got nice sharp edges, and also allows us to shed any water away from the facade where it is required. Okay, so we'll be doing some of those things next, and then moving on to the inside. Chapter 5:05, adding the flashings and trim. We've got a few bits and pieces to do here, so I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. The trim is going around the door and the window. We've also got the sill of the window to put in. And the flashings are going to be the wheat flashings sitting at this point. And then we've got a couple here, and that should be us. Okay, so first challenge is to find them in our chapter 5. I'll just close my entity info down. Is to find them in the chapter 5 components. So let's go down to the W's for wheat flashings. So we've got a wheat screed flashing base and the wheat screed flashing top. So let's use the base first, and let's just bring this in. And if we pop this in onto this board, like so, then that should be that. It's not quite flush with this. If you want to use the scale tool to pull that out, then that's fine. We could adjust these sorts of things, but this is a great way of learning whether these things work. If you're going to order these sort of bent metal flashings, make sure that everything does line up first, instead of just getting them on site and realizing they're slightly too short. So it's always a great way to make sure that everything is as it should be. So now we're going to go up to D for the double door trim. So double door trim external. Let's grab that. This is going onto the subframe. Okay, so this will be fixed along. Whether we have this drop down as excessive as we have is going to be up to the design, but what's going to happen here is this is then going to shed water that's coming down this. It's also sloped slightly. We've got these capillary breaks as well. So the other thing that would happen is round about this point, we would be putting a non-setting mastic bead all the way around it as well. So lots and lots of gunk going into this to make sure it's all safe and waterproof. So we'll just drop this out a bit and pop it in there. So that's our door trim. That should be fine all the way around. And then we get a nice little junction at this point. Then we could possibly take this over a little bit. We might also think about trimming off the tongue of this one, or work out a slightly different way of doing it. Okay, so maybe we take that back and line this a bit closer in. Again, the fact that we've got this level of detail gives us the opportunities to check these things out at a later date. So up to this bit here, this is the separation point between the board and the screed. So again, we're going to go back down to the wheat flashings and wheat flashing upper or top. So let's find that wheat screed flashing top. So this one, let's just drop this into place. I think I've actually grooved out the insulation board for this one. So that goes there, and then we'll push it in along the green axis to about there. So again, this comes over the top. So make sure that any moisture doesn't run down in this bit, even though it is protected. It's much better to do that sort of thing. And we also need a trim for the stucco. Okay, so the stucco wouldn't just be left loose at the bottom. We'd have a beading that we could work to. So I think that's down at the S's for stucco bead, stucco starter bead. So let's bring this one in, and let's just drop this in at this point. Okay, so that comes in there. We work our stucco down to that then. Okay, so that's another bit of trim. So again, gunk in this point to stop any ingress at that point, and then we're looking pretty good. Okay, so this window sill and the window trim. So let's come down now to our window trim external. Let's pick that one. And let's do a similar thing with this. Let's drop this in at this point. And then we can move this up a little bit. Something like that. That's dropped down a little bit there. So let's leave it at this point. And again, we'll be sealing this gap. Probably put the gunk in first and then fix this in through the head at that point. So we've got that bit, and then we've just got the window sill, and we'll pick that up, and that goes over this bit. Again, let's just drop it into place and kind of line it through. Trickier than it looks, this. So we've got that little cutout for this, so let's grab it at that point, just drop it in at that intersection there, making sure we've pretty much sealed all around, and that will probably do us for the window. Just make sure that that sits out far enough. Yes, it does. So we've got, again, our oversail drip. So everything looking pretty good. Okay, so that's the outside trimmed and sealed wherever possible. Again, lots of mastic used in these situations. We can move on to the inside now. So the inside shouldn't take as long as the outside to do, because there are less finishes to consider. Chapter 507, we're going to add some finish to the very bottom of the wall now, between the patio concrete and the door threshold and the underside of the cladding. So let's just zoom in a bit. First up, we're going to put some wallboard in there, insulating wallboard. So let's come down to the T for thermal wallboard. Let's pick that up and drop that in at that point. I think that should be in the right position. Good enough. And then I have got some mesh, so lower mesh. That comes complete with the fixings. So let's drop that in like so. I think that sits on the top as well. So that's looking good. So a bit of insulation to protect. So this, we're giving it a little bit of extra insulation there. So insulated on the inside here. Ground's insulated from there as well, but just a little bit of extra. And again, depending on required levels, then you might need to up the insulation levels to your code. And then we've got this lower level stucco complete. So click on that, and let's just drop that in somewhere like that. And then we can put this in from this back corner up to here. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Easy peasy to finish off that bit. I think that's really done now. So we've got this little bit of beading running there, so we can run our stucco to it. So that's separated from this slightly. Probably, again, a little bit of insulation. We might have to consider drainage systems in the patio. Certainly it's running to falls. Again, this sort of thing will be ironed out on site, but every situation will be different. That's the one thing you have to bear in mind when you're putting these details together. You'll never find, the perfect solution. So conversation, heads together with people who know the systems and the code inside out, and that is the way you will learn how to put these things together. Right, we have got some things to do on the inside now. I did say a couple of lessons earlier that we were going inside, but now I think we are definitely going inside to finish off the interior. Chapter 508, we're adding the interior finish and a little bit of trim. So internal render layers for this bit, and then we've got the trim around the window and the window boards to go in as well. So as we're down on the W's, window edge trim internal, we'll start with that one. So we'll just drop this in and then just put it in place somewhere around here. Then we should be able to just slide this along and slide this along. So using X-ray now gets a bit fiddly because you start to see everything. It's handy when you haven't got so much stuff, but now you need to maybe move things once or twice. Just lock it out on the axis and then just line up with these faces. So that should be okay for that. It does poke out just a little bit. And then if we go up to window board, we should then be able to pop this in. So again, just lift that up and slide it back down to this surface. And then we should be able to slide that in like so. Okay, so that's that bit. It's a little bit of a gap between there. Maybe we could move the window sort of in a touch so it lines through. Again, it might be easier than it looks, or easier to do than it looks. There you go. Let's make sure that's not affected the outside. We can move this in then. I told you there might be a little bit of juggling these things when we get to the end. That's all okay. Then we can copy this. Like so, to there. That should be fine now. Oh, this window is separate. This one should be easier to move. So I'll just move this out on the red axis, lock it out, and then just slide over to this face. That'll get it into position. So our windows now are neat, tidy, sealed. Window board, that's fine. This is high level, so we're not really going to be accessing this very much. Probably a place to gather dust, but then a mop on a long bit of stick should sort that out. And then finally, we'll go up to internal render layers. So this one here, and let's drag that in and drop that in round about this point here. So we can pick this internal corner up and drop that in to there. And that should be it. Okay, now we might have a little bit to do at this point, depending on how this trim works with the roof joists and the internal cladding. I think I've got it so it's just about right on there. We might have to put a bit of mastic in there just to seal that little sort of potential shadow gap at that point. But as far as everything else goes, we have now built up our wall, our internal layers. We've trimmed around internally. We've got our rain screen on, our insulation and stucco. We've got our external weatherproofing and all of our trim around there as well. So as far as the detail goes and as far as the design goes based on our original, it's not too bad at all. Okay, so roof next, and then we'll be closing it off. And finally, we can look at taking this 3D information and putting it into 2D.